I unfortunately didn't get to hear Michael's introduction. I hope he said some things that piqued your curiosity or gave you some information about me or something that might be puzzling about me to you. Because in life, I've been called many things. Last weekend, I was at a Star Trek convention at Excel down in London, past Canary Wharf. And I was introduced as a legend and an icon, which I thought was a bit over the top, more than a bit over the top. But what that reminded me of was I, in the very early part of my life, was called other over-the-top things that weren't so complimentary. I was called slant eye, enemy, and that ugly racial slur, Jap. On December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor in the middle of the Pacific was bombed by Japan. And it was a horrific bombing. Over 2,400 people were killed. 18 ships were sunk, 8 of them battleships. And the horror and the terror of that bombing swept across the Pacific to the west coast of the United States and rolled across the country all the way to the Atlantic coast. The next morning, President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared war on Japan. And overnight, Americans of Japanese ancestry, Japanese Americans, were looked at with suspicion and fear and outright hatred. We were spat on and assaulted on the street. The government came down with a curfew on all Japanese Americans. We had to be home by 8 p.m. at night and stay home until 6 a.m. in the morning. We were imprisoned in our homes at night. Our homes, businesses, our cars were graffitied with ugly racist slogans. And the government, the next morning, we made that discovery. When we went to the bank to make a deposit or make a withdrawal, we discovered that the bank accounts were frozen. Our life savings was taken from us. And yet, despite all that, young Japanese Americans, like all young Americans, rushed to their recruitment centers to volunteer to serve in the U.S. military. This was an act of patriotism, which was answered with a slap on the face. They were denied military service and categorized as enemy alien, totally irrational. People volunteering to serve and fight for the United States to be refused military service and categorized as enemy alien. Enemy alien. That word is a pernicious word, and the politicians took that up. The mayor of Los Angeles, Fletcher Bowen, said, no matter how many generations the Japanese are in our country, they cannot be assimilated. They will always be a threat. The Attorney General of California, the state of California, the top attorney, was a man named Earl Warren, who was later to become an important historic personage as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. But in 1941 and 2, he was the Attorney General. He had his eyes on the governor's seat, and he needed a campaign issue. And he saw that the single most inflammatory issue in California at that time was lock up the Japanese. And so this top attorney of the state of California used that issue as his campaign issue, a major plank. He made an amazing statement from Sacramento, our state capital, where my mother was born. He said, "We have no reports of spying or subterfuge or fifth column activities by Japanese Americans." And that is ominous, because the Japanese are inscrutable, that racist stereotype. And because we can't tell what they're thinking, it would be prudent to lock them up before they do anything. Lock them up before they do anything. For this top attorney in the state of California, the Attorney General, the absence of evidence was the evidence. And he won and became governor of California and was reelected twice. This kind of madness, hysteria, went all the way up to the White House in Washington, D.C. On February 19, 1942, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which ordered all Japanese Americans on the West Coast, from Arizona to California to Oregon to Washington State, to be summarily rounded up. Approximately 120,000 of us rounded up to be imprisoned in 10 barbed wire prison camps to be built in the most desolate and God-forsaken places in the United States. Innocent American citizens to be imprisoned in desolate places, the blistering hot desert of Arizona, the cold windswept high plains of Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, and two of the most desolate places in California. Our family was a family of 5. My parents, I had just turned 5 years old on April 20th, 1942. My brother Henry was a year younger, 4 years old, and we had a baby sister, Nancy, who wasn't even a year old. She was an infant. One morning in May, my father came into the bedroom I shared with my brother, dressed us hurriedly, and told us to wait in the living room while our parents did some last-minute packing in their bedroom. So, with nothing to do, my brother and I were standing by the front window, just gazing out at our neighborhood, when suddenly we saw 2 soldiers marching up our driveway. They carried rifles with shiny bayonets on them. They stomped up the front porch and with their fists began banging on the door. It was terrifying. I thought the whole house was trembling. My father came out of his bedroom, answered the door, and literally at gunpoint, we were ordered out of our home. My father gave my brother and me boxes about this size, tied with twine to carry. He hefted 2 heavy suitcases, and we followed him out down the front porch and stood on the driveway waiting for our mother to come out. When my mother finally came out, she had our baby sister in one arm, a huge duffel bag in the other, and tears were cascading down her cheeks. It was a terrorizing moment that is seared into my memory. I will never forget that horrible morning. We were loaded onto trucks already packed with other Japanese American families and their luggage, driven downtown to the Buddhist temple where others had been massed, and I saw a row of buses waiting for us. We were loaded onto those buses, and the caravan drove out to Santa Anita Racetrack in the outskirts of Los Angeles. There we were unloaded, herded over to the stable area, and each family was assigned a horse stable, still pungent with the stink of fresh horse manure, to sleep in. For my parents, it was a degrading, humiliating order. But to 5-year-old me, I was excited. We get to sleep where the horses sleep. It was exciting. But that excitement turned into a sickness. Both my sister and I got sick. We were there at Santa Anita for about 4 months when the construction of the main camps was completed. We were to be sent to a camp in the swamps of Arkansas, land reclaimed from the swamp, a camp called Rower. We were to be transported by train 2/3 of the way across the country. My father told us that we were going on a long vacation in the country. I thought all vacations by train had armed soldiers at both ends of each car. But I couldn't understand why the grown-ups all looked so sad. Some of them were even crying. It was a journey of 4 days and 3 nights. And we arrived at Rower internment camp. I still remember the barbed wire fences that confined us. I remember the tall sentry tower with the soldiers with rifles looking down at us. I remember the searchlight that followed us when I made the night runs to the latrine. My mother considered it an offensive light every time we went to the latrine. But to 5-year-old me, I thought it was nice that they lit the way for me to pee. Too innocent to understand the situation. I went to school in a black tar paper barrack, and we began every morning, every school day, with a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I could see the barbed wire fence and the sentry tower right outside our schoolhouse window as I recited the words, "With liberty and justice for all." Too innocent to feel the stinging irony in those words, liberty and justice for all. We were there for a year, and then the government realized that they had a wartime manpower shortage. Now they needed us. But their dilemma was, how could they justify drafting enemy aliens out of a barbed wire prison camp for service in the United States military? Their solution was even more irrational, a loyalty questionnaire. And in the confusion and the urgency and the madness of wartime, many people that were illiterate were drafted, and some who were absolutely incompetent were drafted. And it seems these people were the ones assigned to draft the loyalty questionnaire. It was about 30 questions, but embedded in that loyalty questionnaire were two questions, key questions that the government expected yes answers to. Question 27 asked, will you serve in the United States military on combat duty wherever ordered? For my parents, they were being asked to abandon their very young children in barbed wire imprisonment and bear arms to defend the country that's imprisoning their children. It was a preposterous demand. Question 28, the other critical question, was one sentence, but with two conflicting ideas. It asked, will you swear your allegiance to the United States of America and forswear your allegiance to the Emperor of Japan? We're Americans. We're overwhelmingly people who never even thought of a loyalty to the emperor. But the government assumed, just by our faces, that we had an inborn racial loyalty to the Japanese emperor, which was offensive to us. So if we answered no, meaning I don't have a loyalty to the emperor to forswear, that no applied to the first part of the very same sentence. Will you swear your loyalty to the United States of America? If you answered yes, meaning I do swear my loyalty to the United States, that yes applied to the second part meant you were confessing to a non-existent loyalty to the emperor. It was a no-win question. You lost with a yes and you lost with a no. My parents never lost their moral compass. They answered truthfully no to both key questions. No to 27 and no to 28. And because of those two no answers, they were categorized as disloyal. And we had to be moved to a higher security camp in Northern California called Tule Lake, which was redesignated as a segregation camp for disloyals. They weren't disloyals. They just thought rationally on those irrational questions. Tule Lake was meant as a show of intimidation. It was a camp that was bristling with military armament. Tule Lake had more than one barbed wire fence, two more, 3 layers of barbed wire fences. The sentry towers were now equipped with machine guns pointed down at us. And the outer perimeter was patrolled by a half a dozen tanks, military vehicles of battle that belonged on a battlefield, not there to intimidate and goad Japanese American citizens who were already had already endured an unrelenting series of outrages. However, despite the sloppy and crudely worded offensive loyalty questionnaire, thousands of young Japanese Americans were so desperate to get out of imprisonment that they bit the bullet, swallowed the ugly taste, and answered those 2 offensive questions with yeses, 2 yeses. And thus, they were qualified to serve in the U.S. military. They were drafted out of barbed wire imprisonment from all 10 camps. The women were put into the Women's Army Corps. The men were put into a segregated, all Japanese American unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. The men of the 442nd were so determined to prove themselves American that they adopted the slogan, "Go for broke. We're going to give it everything we got." They were sent to the battlefields of Europe, and they were treated like cannon fodder. Those battles in Europe were firefights that went on for days, some for weeks. The stalemated battles went on for months, and the 442nd was used as the front line. The first wave went into battle. They were gunned down. The next wave went in, and the third wave, and fourth wave. They fought with incredible, fierce determination, with courage that was astonishing given their background. and many fought heroically. The 442nd sustained the highest combat casualty rate of any unit, any American unit in the Second World War. And when the war ended, the 442nd returned to the United States as the most decorated unit in the history of American military history. They were welcomed back on the White House lawn by President Harry Truman, who said to them, "You fought not only the enemy, but prejudice, and you won." The war was over, and as suddenly and as irrationally as our confinement, the gates were thrown open. But we were impoverished. The government had taken everything from us. The government gave us a one-way ticket to anywhere in the United States that we wanted to go to, and $25 to rebuild our lives from nothing. My parents decided to go back to Los Angeles, where they met, married, and started our family. This is a story of what happened to Japanese Americans. After the war, and I became a preteen and a teenager, I became very curious about our confinement during the Second World War. My father never gave up hope on American democracy. He told me that our democracy is a people's democracy. And despite the fact that he had endured the darkest breakdown of our democratic ideals, he still felt that those words were relevant. But it's a people's democracy, and it's dependent on people to actively engage in the process to make those words have nobility. And he urged his children to be active in student government, and I was. I ran for many offices and was elected in middle school. And at Mount Vernon Junior High School, I was elected student body president. At Los Angeles High School, I was elected president of the senior board. I went with my father to volunteer in countless political campaigns. My first presidential campaign was the Adlai Stevenson for President campaign headquarters. Alas, our candidate didn't win. The man who got the Democratic nomination was John Kennedy. But I became active in the process and learned and understood that our democracy requires determination and faith and active engagement. And similarly, as time passed, the government began taking small steps toward the Japanese American community. In 1980, under the leadership of President Jimmy Carter, Congress formed a federal commission called the Commission on Wartime Internment of Civilians. In 1981, they held hearings on that subject. I testified at one of those hearings. And I'd like to share with you my final paragraph of that testimony before the Congressional Commission. I have come to understand that as noble and as precious as our American ideals are, they can also be very fragile. Democracy can only be as good or as strong or as true as the people who make it so. It is my belief that America today is strong enough and confident enough to recognize a grievous failure. I believe that it is honest enough to acknowledge that damage was done. And I would like to think that it is honorable enough to provide proper restitution for the injury that was done. For in a larger sense, injury was done to those very ideals that we hold as fundamental to our American system. We, all of us as Americans, must strive to redeem those precepts that faltered years ago when I was a boy. And in that role as an American, I urge restitution for the incarceration of American citizens of Japanese ancestry, because that restitution would, at the same time, be a bold move to strengthen the integrity of America. That was my testimony in 1981. In 1988, Congress passed the Civil Liberties Act, which was signed by President Ronald Reagan on behalf of the American people. And he apologized for that grievous failure and paid recompense. Our democracy is a noble democracy that requires the active engagement of its citizens to make those noble words have truth and to make them shining. Americans and all people that subscribe to democracy have the grave responsibility as citizens to actively engage and participate in a participatory democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for visiting us today, and what an amazing speech. I just thought to pick up on a theme that you ended on, democracy. In 1972, you mentioned about running for mayor of Los Angeles, and obviously, unfortunately, you ended up runner-up in that election. Why were you interested in the field of politics in the context of having done so in high school, but of course, had a fledgling career in the arts as well?
Well, when one is engaged in the political arena, there's an infectious thing about it. It's a bug, and it's contagious. And you see some people that are running for office and winning that you don't think are quite up to snuff. You think, I can do better than that. And I love engaging with people, discussing issues and solving problems and how to make our democracy a better democracy, having experienced the failure of it during the Second World War. So I ran for elective office, and it's not as easy as it seems. It is grueling. It is demanding, and it's also a matter of luck. Until about 9:20, I was leading, and I thought maybe I am going to have a different career. But when it looked almost certain, you also think of the other career that you love, acting. I love acting. That's my passion. And so then after 9:30, other precincts came in. And shucks darn, I didn't win. But I thought, well, that's all right, because I have my career. And I would not have gotten Star Trek, in the movie version. I had done the TV series already, but not the feature films. but I had my cake and and I was able to eat it too because I had political credibility after that, and I had my career as well.
Amazing. Going into your acting, could you tell us more about what got you into acting? What inspired you to want to pursue such a grueling career, but also quite glamorous as well?
Well, my mother used to tell her friends that in the maternity ward, when she heard that stentorian yowl coming from the baby, she knew she was saddled with a ham. I loved acting from as far back as I could remember. My mother took me to the theater, and that was a magical experience. And seeing the color and the excitement, and in incarceration itself during the war, there were people that put on talent shows in the mess hall after dinner, and that just made me want to be one of those people singing and performing in the mess hall after dinner. And so it was something that was in me and a burning passion. But my father eventually went into real estate, and he encouraged me to go into architecture. He thought my passion for the theater is a good thing. It's culture, and it's good to have culture in your life. But he didn't think it's something that you make your living off of. It's a very chancy a career. And so he thought, I think he wanted to put out a sign that read, Takei and Son Real Estate Development, and that I would design the buildings and he would develop it. But alas, well, I did begin my college studies as an architecture student up at Berkeley for 2 years. But the fire kept getting hotter and hotter, and I had to do what I really wanted to do with my life. And so he talked me into, I wanted to go to the actor's studio and study. I told him, Daddy, that's where all the great actors are coming from. Marlon Brando, James Dean, Montgomery Clift. But he said, that's a respected acting school, but they won't give you a diploma when you finish there. If you must study acting and the theater, right here in town in Los Angeles at UCLA, they have a fine theater school. And when you finish there, they will give you that documentation, that diploma, which your mother and I want you to have. I think he was thinking of me becoming a drama teacher. He thought my major was hopeless. But UCLA is in Los Angeles, where Hollywood is located. And a casting director happened to see a student production at UCLA, picked me out of that, and plunked me into my first feature film, starring Richard Burton, this new Shakespearean actor from England coming to Hollywood. And all my scenes were with Richard Burton. Luck and fortune happens in strange and unpredictable ways.
Yeah, acting is known notoriously for being one in which, majority of people do not succeed in, and luck does play a big role in it. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with a viral Netflix show called Squid Game. And
What?
Squid Game. Squid Game. It's a viral TV show, and my question was going to basically talk about how Netflix and streaming services has allowed for much more access into the mainstream media from a lot more people. Do you think that acting and the world of theatre and the world of film is better with the likes of Amazon Prime, with the likes of video, with the likes of Netflix and streaming services?
It's certainly created more opportunities for actors to practice, but it also thins out the the really meaty opportunities. It's less competitive now. It was much more competitive before. But I support that. There should be as many opportunities as there are talented actors, writers, directors. I think it's important that each artist is given that opportunity to find his or her métier and grow.
Great. Recent TV shows show that executives are pushing more to be much more inclusive in the way they cast for characters and the kind of stories they tell. And in your opening speech, you talked about how being Japanese American, the sort of experiences you had and how the hate or the perception impacted you different times. Last year, there was this Stop Asian Hate hashtag going around. I was wondering what you thought about the state of the arts right now and whether you think film can do good in trying to change people's wrong perceptions and improve biases.
Those are two questions there.
Yes.
One is, how does art help get people to recognize the diversity in our society? And the other part is how, well, I think that's the crux of your question. The more we get exposed to the reality of our society, the better it is for us to understand the society we live in. For example, in the United States, we've had 4 centuries of Africans in our country. I'm tempted to say African American, but you're African British. Africans who have become Americans, but they were slaves when they were first brought here, and there was 2 centuries of slavery that define who they are. And then we had what was called Jim Crow. We fought a civil war, and the South lost, and the Emancipation Proclamation was signed by President Lincoln. And so they were no longer slaves, but we had a second class of people, black people who had been slaves, who had to live under Jim Crow, a system that had a different level of citizenship, 3/5 of a man, and some of the horrors of racism was practiced in secret societies like the Ku Klux Klan. And then in the 20th century, mid-20th century, one charismatic leader, Dr. Martin Luther King, led the movement for African-American equality. And because of my childhood imprisonment, I became an activist on social justice issues, and I became active in the civil rights movement. I did a civil rights musical as the lone Asian student in a student civil rights movement. We were a big hit on Broadway, in Los Angeles, and then we played on off-Broadway in New York, and we sang at almost every other civil rights rally in Southern California, where I met Dr. King himself and shook his hand and chatted with him. And I must say, for about 3 days after that, this hand did not get washed. There may be some remnant of that handshake somewhere embedded in my hand. So I was active in the civil rights movement and many other social justice movement. And that part of my being was defined by my childhood imprisonment.
That's very deep. I recognize that that's part of what inspired your book here. They called us enemy. This graphic novel, which is a New York Times bestseller. Could you tell us more about what inspired this book and how you came to write it?
Actually, there was another book that preceded that. In 1994, I wrote my autobiography. By that time, I had Star Trek under my belt, and I knew that that would be a great vehicle to ride to tell the story of my internment, because that's a dark chapter of American history, and it had not been a part of our educational system. And so I felt a personal mission to raise the awareness of that dark chapter of American history. And I thought by writing my autobiography of my entire life, and the first third of it being about my childhood imprisonment and my growing understanding of our democracy, that I could tell that story to a larger audience by including my Star Trek experience and talking about my colleagues. And so therefore, the cover had me in Starfleet uniform looking to the stars, and the title was To the Stars. And it sold well. But still, after that sold well, I would come across many people that I consider well-informed, well-read people. When I shared my childhood imprisonment with them, they were shocked that such a thing happened in the United States. And that concerned me. And so I felt the need to keep on keeping on. And so I decided to tell the first third of my autobiography as a graphic memoir, a comic book. Because when I was a teenager and a preteen, I loved comic books. I absorbed in comic books through my pores, and that remains with you. And I thought that's the way to reach the next generation of Americans. And so I worked with graphic novelists who broke down the internment third of my autobiography into panels. And then we found an amazingly talented young artist named Harmony Becker. Loved her name to begin with, but she had a wonderful way of capturing people's emotions on their faces. And she did the drawing in your book there. And that's when it became this enormous bestseller in the United States. And I'm hoping that the generation that gets exposed to that story with that book will become the voters of tomorrow and hopefully movers and shakers of tomorrow, with the knowledge of the fragility of our democracy and the importance, the critical importance of active citizen participation in the process of our democracy.
Thank you. I'm keen to go on to questions because I know that we're crossing time. But you mentioned that you're a comic book lover, and as a comic book lover myself, I have to ask two quick ones. Marvel or DC?
Can I love both?
Yeah, sure. The follow-up question is, who would win in a fight between Hulk and Thor? The Hulk and Thor. who would you back in a fight between the Hulk and Thor?
You know, it's been so long. I'm going to have to think on that.
That's fine.
And I will give me your email.
I will do. Right, I'd like to open the floor for questions now. Yes, the lady in green. We just wait for the mic and the...
Hiya. Thank you so much for your talk. It's really inspiring, especially because I'm half Japanese myself, but didn't grow up in Japan. So I hope you understand the context of where the questions are coming from. So I have two questions. One being, I saw that you studied at Sophia University for a while.
Yes.
So I was wondering.
Summer school.
Sorry?
Summer school.
Summer school, right. So when you went back to Japan, I was wondering like what your experience was regarding your identity. And then another question was during your acting career. It was really interesting hearing how you started your acting career. But did you ever feel that there were certain stereotypes that you had to, or that you experienced because of your Japanese ancestry? Thank you.
Well, having grown up with a knowledge of my imprisonment and the racism in the United States, I was entirely mindful of racism and stereotyping in comic books, movies, television, the theater, and how when major roles, Asian roles come up, it's always played by non-Asians in grotesque kind of reptilian eye makeup.
Audrey Hepburn's.
What?
Like Audrey Hepburn's.
Yes.
Yes.
So I was very conscious, and as an aspiring actor, I was conscious of my responsibility in making some effort to changing that. And Lady Luck, good fortune, seemed to be with me. I got that lucky break while still a student at UCLA, but also once my career got started, Gene Roddenberry, the creator and writer and the visionary of Star Trek, happened in my life. Gene Roddenberry was a real revolutionary. He felt that television was being wasted on brainless quiz shows, comedy shows, cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians, particularly in the 60s when the United States was so turbulent with dramatic issues that wasn't being reflected on television. We had, as I said, the civil rights movement going on. We had the Vietnam War going on in Southeast Asia, but that war was splitting the United States. Those that were fiercely supportive of that war, and those of us, and I was engaged in that as well, who supported the peace movement. And by that time, I was a working actor, so I joined the Entertainment Industry for Peace and Justice, EIPJ, and worked alongside Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland for peace in Vietnam. And so I was always mindful of the important significance, the symbolism that I had as an actor. And Gene Roddenberry felt that these stories, dramatic stories of the 1960s, could be told in this advertising medium called television by putting it in the 23rd century and dealing with the issues in metaphors. And so he said, the story will take place on the Starship Enterprise, but the Starship Enterprise was a metaphor for Starship Earth. And the strength of this starship is in its diversity, coming together and working in concert as a team, facing a common challenge and being able to tap different perspectives from this angle, that angle, and this angle, with this knowledge of his or her history and his or her faith, his or her culture, and you can come up with a better solution than a singular. So finding strength in our diversity coming together, and that was personified by the way he cast the show. An African woman as the communications officer. During the Cold War, we had a Russian character who was a trusted member of the team, and my character representing Asia. And to give you an example of how deeply Gene Roddenberry thought about the names for these characters, he had a quandary with the name for the Asian character, because every Asian surname is nationally specific. Tanaka is Japanese, Wong is Chinese, Kim is Korean, and 20th century Asia was turbulent with warfare, colonization, and revolutions. And he didn't want to bring that aspect in. He wanted the character to be Pan-Asian, to be representative of all Asia. And so he had a map of Asia pinned on his office wall, and he was gazing up at it, and he found off the coast of the Philippines the Sulu Sea, and he thought, the waters of a sea touch all shores. And that's how he came up with the name Sulu, for a character to represent all of Asia. So he was that kind of visionary, to deal with issues and also to give thought to the turbulence of that period and try to find a solution that was utopian, if not totally idealistic. But I happened on that, and that certainly gave me that platform for my other activism. And so I owe so much to that extraordinary man, Gene Roddenberry. And I think the storytelling now is getting to be richer and reflect a more vibrant and real society than what Hollywood used to.
Thank you all very much for coming this evening. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you for joining us today, George, and I hope that we see you again soon.